Right, so there's quite a common misconception that wave makers are just for sort of saltwater tanks, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So there's more and more people starting to integrate wave makers into freshwater setups now, and there's so many benefits to them, especially when it comes to African cichlids. So today we're going to talk all about flow, different ways that you can implement it into your tank, and the benefits that you're going to get from it. Right, so I've already touched on this subject way back when I first started making videos for the African cichlid tank, but the quality on it is absolutely terrible because it was quite early on. I was still finding my feet with editing and uploading and things like that. So I wanted to make it again and make a decent video because it is an important topic, and flow's really overlooked, especially in freshwater systems, and can easily be forgotten about when you're keeping African cichlids as well. But it's such an important thing to implement into the tank. So what we'll do is we'll talk about exactly why flow is so beneficial for these fish, and then we'll get into the ways that you can implement it onto the tank. So reason number one is keeping your tank clean. If you've got a good flow rate in your tank, it eliminates dead spots. And what we mean by dead spots is areas where water's not moving, there's no flow getting to it. So you can get a build-up of detritus, fish poo, fish food, can all build up in these dead spots, and then that can contribute to, you know, ammonia, nitrites, nitrates building up in your water column a lot quicker. So what ideally you want to do is have decent flow rate around the tank, which is going to lift those bits up into the water column, and then your filtration or your overflow is going to take them in more easy and send it down to the filtration to be dealt with. So eliminating dead spots is a big one because these are such mess eaters. We overcrowd the tank. There's fish poo that's going to be all over the place if you don't do it. So it really contributes to keeping the tank tidy, keeping it clear of any sort of impurities. And also as well, I mean, most of the time we're going to have just rocks in an African cichlid tank. That's an African cichlid biotope. That's where they're from. So we're very rarely going to have plants in there that we're going to have to worry about battering with flow. So we can introduce wave makers and things in there a little bit more freely, put them in places where dead spots are to really help lift everything up and keep the tank clean. Reason number two is it makes an excellent aggression deterrent. So when you see these fish swimming around and are on chases, if you've got certain wave makers in certain places, like I've got flow coming in from a few different places on this tank, and I've got quite a well disguised wave maker up at the top, which I'll run into after and why I use that particular one. But the flow rate, when there's a bit of turbulence and fish are chasing, that flow rate can sort of steer them off course and distract them. So it makes a really good aggression deterrent. I've had tanks where I've not had wave makers in, and I've noticed since I have had wave makers in that I get less aggression, and when fights break out and chases start going on, they disperse a lot quicker because they hit these little turbulent areas, and it's like a distraction. I mean, it knocks them off course, and then everything sort of calms down and eases out again. So don't underestimate the power of flow when it comes to aggression in a fish tank, especially with African cichlids, because I have seen a massive difference in comparison to when I was using it and when I wasn't, on how the fish getting chased and how long these fights and chases end up lasting for. So if you're having problems with aggression in your tank and you haven't got any sort of flow in there at the moment, try introducing it and see what impact it has, because I've had amazing impact from it since I've been using it. Reason number 3 is increased surface agitation. So if you're not familiar with what surface agitation is, essentially it's the movement on the surface of the water. So the more flow you have in here, if you have power heads, wave makers, your return lines, you can see the agitation my return line and my wave makers causing on the top of the tank. And why that's so important is because it gives us better gas exchange. So it means that we're getting more oxygen into the water for the fish, and carbon dioxide and stuff is working its way out. So we're getting more oxygenation, and why that's so important for African cichlids is more so than any other fish, is because you can see the activity levels in African cichlids. They're constantly swimming, they're constantly active, it's fast paced, backwards and forwards, so they take up a lot more oxygen from the water column. So surface agitation with African cichlids is a big deal. It's important that you've got it and you're getting the adequate amount so that you're oxygenating the water for your fish. Number 4 is the health benefits and the development of your fish. So as opposed to sitting in sort of a stagnant pool with hardly any flow, when you're introducing flow and different currents into the tank, if you've got wave makers and you're using them in your cichlid tanks already, you'll agree with me that the fish, they do like to swim against those currents. So it's almost like they enjoy it. It's like a treadmill for fish, and I know that sounds ridiculous.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
But when you think about it, when they're in the wild, they are dealing with these little currents and tides and things like that. So it's really, really beneficial for your fish to have that additional flow, because it helps keep them active, especially with things like your haplochromuses, which are open water swimmers. And they're in these smaller tanks when they're used to these open water. They like swimming around and they like the additional sort of currents to swim against. And it really helps develop the fish, keep them strong and exercised as well. So how do we optimize flow? How do we get the best results for us on our tanks for these fish? We'll start with the filtration, because that is the primary source of flow for most of us when we set up a tank. We're all going to have filtration on our tank, so we'll start there. What you want to take into consideration when you're thinking about canister filters, in-tank filtration, I mean, I would always suggest a bare minimum canister filter on an African cichlid setup, because you need to think about the tank turnover rate. So if you're not familiar with what tank turnover is, it's how many times the total volume of your tank is turned over by your filtration within an hour. So ideally, African cichlids, you want a tank turnover rate of about 5 to 10 times per hour. So this is about a 750 litre tank. I turn it out, my flow rate on my return pumps at 6,000 litres an hour. So I'm getting a good tank turnover from that, and then at the same time I'm getting a good flow rate. So when you're thinking about buying canister filters, make sure you're considering the size of your tank and the output of your actual canister filter. So see how many litres an hour that canister filter you're going to buy is putting out, and make sure that it's right for your tank and you've got the bare minimum of 5 times. The more flow rate you've got, the more benefits you're going to get from it on the return line of your tank. But I always think with canister filters on African cichlid tanks, not so much with the smaller ones, but if you've got a 5-6 plus foot tank, then ideally for optimal results, I think you should have a canister filter at each end. And it kind of eliminates the need for a wave maker as well, because you can have an inlet and an outlet in each corner of the tank. And then that outlet with the right power on it's going to cause surface agitation this end, surface agitation that end. You're going to get a lot of turbulence at both ends of the tank, and then they meet in the middle. And where they meet, that's going to sort of circulate and give you more turbulence there as well. So if you're thinking about a canister filter setup, yeah, it might not be cost effective, but for optimal results and a good flow rate in your tank to eliminate you having to get wave makers in there as well, having one canister filter at each end with the flow rate coming from each corner and meeting in the middle sort of gives you an optimal result and helps to eliminate as many dead spots in the tank as possible because you've got flow coming from both ends. The problem I have, because this is a drilled tank and I've got a sump, I've got the overflow in the center of the tank. So, and that's where my return line comes in as well. So you can see my return lines here. Now, the problem that causes is it allows me to direct flow to this end of the tank. I mean, I can spin these little nozzles round and point them this way, but preferably I want both nozzles to get as much flow in this area of the tank as I can, because I've got one that points along the back wall and one that points along to the front of the tank. So I've got it bouncing off the glass and then I've got it going down the back here, so it's eliminating as many dead spots as possible, which is why I've introduced the Max Spec Gyre wave maker onto the tank. So I'll explain to you a little bit about how this wave maker works and why I love it so much and why it's so good at what it does. But we'll have a look at some other wave makers that I've got as well. As different ways that you can implement flow. You don't have to copy what I'm doing. There's so many different wave makers you can get which do brilliant jobs, but I'll explain to you exactly why I use this one. This Max Spec Gyre, this is a wave maker that is usually sold for marine tanks, creating flow in saltwater aquariums. But the reason I use it on here is because of the effect that it has inside. So this creates something called laminar flow. So what it does is it sits at the very top of the actual tank. It's very discreet. So it's not big and bulky where you can see it down low. It sits right on the surface, nice and flat and long, so it stretches from front to back. And what it does, it creates a blanket of flow. So it pushes water all the way along the top, which gives me really good surface agitation for a start, because this is where the flow's coming in right along the surface. But it creates that blanket. And as that blanket comes along, it bounces off the back wall here, and then it continues to come along the bottom. So it's like a big circle, a little bit of a washing machine. So it comes all along the top with the surface agitation, hits the back here, and then drags everything along the bottom and pulls it up into the water column so that it can go into my overflow and down into my filtration. So that effect is so good. It just drags everything. Like this side of the tank is more or less spotless all the time. And it doesn't always pick everything up, but it picks the major particulates up, and then it drags me a nice little pile down here. So when it comes to siphoning or cleaning the tank, I'm not having to go all over the place. Everything just collects here where the flow scoops it in, and I can suck it up, and it makes it a lot easier to maintain. It's also very customizable. So inside the sump, it's got a controller which allows me to do loads of different types of flow. So I can do just a constant blanket where it's constantly pumping across. It can go on a pulse mode where it will deliver a constant flow and then it'll turn itself down, varied rate, and it'll even work backwards where it puts the flow down here, and then if I'm getting any muck collecting here and I select it on reverse, it'll then push down, it kicks everything up again into the water column. So it's a really, really good piece of kit, and it eliminates the majority of the dead spots in my tank, and it scoops up all the crap off the bottom that I need it to. At the same time, with it being at the top, another benefit to that is that it's not as aggressive on your substrate. So it's not kicking up all the sand everywhere and giving you loads of bald spots in your tank. It directs the majority up here, and then when it hits the back, that little bit of flow that's left does all the work along the bottom and helps kick stuff up. So that's why I use the Max Spec Gyre. It gives you great surface agitation, which is a big one, but at the same time, it gives you a nice bit of constant maintenance on the substrate and makes life a lot easier. And then it also creates that circular flow. I mean, you'll see the fish when they're swimming near the surface, you know, it helps break up fights. You can dial it up, dial it down to whatever you want. And then obviously when you use them in conjunction with the return line and these nozzles, it just makes a really good effect on the fish and the tank itself. So I should have one of these in the sun. Yep. So this is a different type of wave maker. It's a little bit mucky because I've pulled it off an old marine tank. I haven't used it in here, so it needs a bit of a clean. But these are really good as well. And what they're very, very good for is targeting specific dead spots in your tank. I'm not a massive fan of them, but I'm not a big fan of having a visible equipment in the tank, which is why I don't really like these, and I think I've got a preference to the Gyre, because you can tuck it out of the way up at the top. But these are very good for targeting specific areas. So they'll sit inside your tank, you'll have a magnet on the other side, and then you can direct it however you want, which allows you to target hard to reach spots. But you can control the flow rate on most of them. These will give you a different type of flow. So it's a lot more aggressive than the blanket. They'll give you a direct jet stream that comes out the end, or some sort of conical flow, which will spread across the tank. So the further it gets, the more it'll spread. But there's a good way you can implement these as well, where you can stick them towards the bottom of the tank and then point them up towards the surface. So you're getting the flow, the water's getting dragged in along the bottom and then shot out up towards the surface. So you're getting surface agitation, good oxygenation, but at the same time, it's picking all the crap off the bottom of the tank as well. So there's no right or wrong answer to what wave makers you do get. It's more or less sort of how cleverly you place them in the tank to do the job that you want them to do. But I've used these on saltwater tanks. Really good for targeting specific dead spots in the tank as well, which things like your Gyre and your blankets aren't going to get to. So if you've got more sort of built up rock work, I get away with this blanket because I've got a low scape and my rock work isn't built up high. If you have bigger pieces of hardscape in your tank, like you would with Mboonas, then something like this is probably going to be a better option, where you can direct it and target around the back and get all the crap moved out. So really good one to consider these. Right, so flow for me is massively important on African cichlid tanks. It seems silly to me to not have it implemented onto your system, especially with all the benefits that come with it. So, you know, your oxygenation, the increased constant maintenance that flow can do on your tank as well, without you having to get your hands dirty, the health benefits to the fish, even mitigating aggression in your tank as well. So it's definitely worth doing. If you're only using a canister filter and your flow rate's not great, try what we said earlier. Try using two, one at each end. See what impact that has. If not, get a wave maker in your tank. Get something like the Cichlids, where you can direct flow into targeted areas, or even something like the Max Spec Gyre. Wave makers come in all shapes and sizes for different tanks. They have all different price perspectives. So, I mean, you want to get something that's renowned, a bit of a decent sort of brand that you know is going to be reliable. But if you're not implementing flow onto an African cichlid tank, especially if you've got a larger system, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's something you really need to consider doing. So, so yeah, let me know if you've got any other sort of tricks and tips you use to integrate flow into your tank. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you next time.